Good evening. We are now on Tuesday, the 28th of February, 2023. I'm continuing with this book. The book traces the role of Judaism and the Jewish people in God's plan for the salvation of mankind from Abraham through the second coming as revealed by the Catholic faith and by a thoughtful examination of history. It will give both Jews and Christians a deeper understanding of Judaism, both as a religion in itself and as a central component of salvation history. We are now going to enter a very interesting chapter 7. I've already had a discussion with one of my adopted daughters, who happens to be from Palestine originally and of Arab descent. So I won't relate the conversation, but it is an interesting one. And I'll begin with one or two prayers. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love entrusts me here, ever this night be at my side, to light and guard, to rule and guide. Amen. As the day draws to a close, we place ourselves in an attitude of thanksgiving. We take time to express our gratitude to a loving God for His abiding presence. We thank Him for the gift of the day and all it has brought with it. We are grateful to God for all the things we were able to achieve throughout the day, and we entrust Him with the concerns of tomorrow. From the rising to the setting of the sun, may the name of the Lord be praised. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be, forever. Amen. Take a few moments for a brief examination of conscience. Reflect on the ways God acted in your life today. Consider how you responded to His invitation to think, speak, and act in a more Christ-like manner, and in what ways you would like to be a more faithful disciple tomorrow. And I'll read one or two verses from Psalm 51. Create a clean heart in me, O God. Be gracious to me, O God, according to your loving kindness. In the great tenderness of your love, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my guilt, and from my sin cleanse me. Create a clean heart in me, O God, and renew within me an upright spirit. Do not cast me from your presence, and do not withhold your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and let a spirit of willingness sustain me. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. I've now got to just make sure I'm sitting comfortably, stretching out my right leg, which gives me a lot of trouble. And I'm looking at the moment for chapter 7. I didn't mark the book, which I should have done. I haven't begun chapter 7 yet. It is an interesting subject, and we all have to listen carefully, including myself, because I have not read it thoroughly either, only the headlines and a few odd paragraphs. And the footnote, Arab anti-Semitism is literally speaking oxymoronic in that Arabs are also Semites. Nonetheless, the word anti-Semitism will be used here with its common meaning of antipathy towards the Jews. But I'll add something from a conversation that I wasn't going to say, but my daughter said that when she was growing up as a very young child, she does remember, she's same age as my youngest, my son, same year, 76. She remembers being friends with their Jewish neighbours, and they shared and cared and loved about one another. She remembers that even to now. Her father's dead. It was a big family, but the troubles there made many of them leave. So, we're not against anyone, but we're against war between people. So the title of chapter 7 is Anti-Semitism After the Holocaust. That is the subject. So this is way back in 1945, there around that time. And prior to that, it grew. The Nazi campaign to exterminate the Jews ended with the fall of the Third Reich and the Allied liberation of Europe. If it had been a local phenomenon, a characteristic of the German people, an artificial passion created by their leaders for political purposes, or an expression of their social or economic problems, then the end of Nazism in Germany would have been the end of the orchestrated campaign against the Jews. Yet, unfortunately, that was not the case. During the Third Reich itself, the Nazi campaign had received enthusiastic support with the effort, and upon the fall of the Reich, those leaders continued to pursue actively the campaign against the Jews in the Arab world. They took it there. The Nazi campaign appears not as an isolated instance of genocidal anti-Semitism, but rather as one emergence of a larger, continuing campaign that predated it and continues after it, and is now centered in the Arab world. In considering this genocidal anti-Semitism, whether in Nazi Germany or in the Arab world, one does well to remember the words of St. Paul. We are not contending against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this present darkness, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. You can read that in the Bible in the New Testament in Ephesians 6 verse 12. At times, these powers are able to gain inordinate sway over entire populations whenever such wholesale evil emerges, not necessarily of course, directed against the Jews, it can be traced to the practice of diabolical religion, religious or occult practices that, whether the participants are aware of it or not, serve not God, but the rulers of this present darkness, thus increasing their power and influence. The next title, Nazism in the Arab World. And at the bottom there's a note. The best scholarly study of the historical link between the Arab countries and Nazism is Roger Falligot and Rémy Kauffer, Le Croissant et la Croix, Gamma, Paris, Albin, Michel, 1990, which provided much of the background information in this section. If I have time or I remember, I will put that in the footnotes, but no guarantee that I'll remember immediately I've recorded. But I can always add it later if somebody wishes to know. So, let me continue. Nazism in the Arab world. Arab support of Hitler predated his 1933 ascendancy to power, and news of his victory was welcomed with great enthusiasm in the Arab world. Among the first congratulatory telegrams he received were several from Arab capitals. Parties styled after the Nazis soon formed throughout the Arab world. One was Syria's Social Nationalist Party, whose leader, Anton Saada, called himself the Führer of Syria. The party's banner featured a swastika on a black and white background. Excuse me. Sami al-Joundi, one of the founders of the ruling Syrian Ba'ath Party, recalls, "We were racists. We admired the Nazis. We were immersed in reading Nazi literature and books. We were the first who thought of a translation of Mein Kampf. Anyone who lived in Damascus at that time was witness to the Arab inclination toward Nazism. The regard was mutual. Hitler on his end said, 'The Arab liberation movement is our natural ally.' Egypt's Young Egypt Party, founded in October 1933 and home later to later Egyptian President Gamal Nasser, emulated the Nazis in their adoption of stormtroopers, torch processions, and Nazi slogans including "One folk, one party, one leader." They also emulated the Nazis in calling for boycotts of all Jewish businesses and in physical attacks on the Jews. A number of Arab leaders had worked closely with Hitler in his campaign to exterminate the Jews and continued the fight against the Jews in the Arab world even after the end of the war. A prime example is the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, and it's got a footnote here It's all very small font. Unless otherwise noted, facts on Husseini from Peters from time immemorial, Sarah Honig, fiendish hypocrisy. There's a whole lot of, I'm not going to read them because the font is too small and it will hurt my eyes. So, I'm just going to get back to there. As the leader of the Arabs in Palestine during the 1930s, he called a jihad to annihilate the Jews of Palestine. I will do some research on that with my daughter, and she's very clever, and she's getting a master's degree, and I will see if she can do some research for me in the books that she has there, can obtain, and maybe also give me further information, because I think we need to know as much as we can. So, in his own words, this is the leader of the Arabs at that time. Her parents weren't even born then, her real parents. Her dad is dead, as I said, and the family is all over the world. I declare a holy war. My Muslim brothers, murder the Jews, murder them all. And I've actually got a picture in here, figure 7.1, Grand Mufti al-Husseini with Hitler, 1941, and the source is Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum, Jerusalem. So I have the picture. So these, we have to base everything on truth and facts. So he incited anti-Jewish riots that caused the death of hundreds of Jewish settlers, including in the Jerusalem riots of 1929, 1936, 1939, which is during the war, not after the war. That would be different, but this is during the war. And the Hebrew riot of 1929, in which the Jews of Hebron were attacked and scores massacred. So this is actually during the war. And there is another picture here, which I will show you. And the picture says, figure 7.2, Mufti inspecting Muslim SS troops in Bosnia, November 1943. So that was during the war. And the source, Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum, Jerusalem. Extensive photographic documentation of the activities of Muslim Nazi troops and of collaboration between Arab and Nazi leaders during the war has been preserved, some of which is available on the internet. The interested reader is referred to the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles, www.wiesenthal.com, the Netherlands Institute for War Documentation in Amsterdam, www.orlogs.knaw.nl, and the Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, www.yadvashem.org, because we all Christians have to seek peace between all people. But all these things doesn't mean that everyone was involved. It was groups and organized groups. We do not blame the whole of the population, because we know factually that many did get along with one another. and not all of everyone was attacked and massacred. So we'll continue. An early supporter of Hitler, he sent emissaries to Berlin in December 1937, which was during the war, and in May 1939, which was also in the war, suggesting collaboration. I mean, Hitler, they were at their top of power at that time. People would join them. That's how human beings are. Adolf Eichmann intended to meet him during his 1937 trip to Palestine and failed, only because the British limited his stay to 48 hours, so they obviously prevented trouble there. Later, during his stay in Berlin, Husseini became a friend and a frequent visitor to Eichmann. When the war broke out, which was 1939 to 1945, Husseini moved to Iraq, where he supported a pro-Nazi coup in 1941, orchestrated by Hitler. And there's footnotes, but they're too small for me to try to read. And we also had these bad groups in UK. I grew up learning about them. So it isn't just in other countries, it also was the same in Britain. There were very anti-social groups that formed. So, when the war broke out, I said that, but I'll repeat it. Husseini moved to Iraq, where he supported a pro-Nazi coup in 1941, orchestrated naturally by Hitler. The coup failed, and he had to flee Iraq. Husseini found a warm welcome in Berlin. Shortly after his arrival there, he gave a speech in which he called the Jews the most fierce enemies of the Muslims. But I'll have to intercept here and say that not all the Muslims were warlike, not all of them. Some of them were very devout in whatever they believed, and an ever-corruptive element in the world. Received as a personal guest of Hitler, he was put up in a mansion known as the Islamische Zentralinstitut, with no E because it's in German, which had been a Jewish Hebrew school before its confiscation, and he was given a princely salary, reportedly over $20,000 a month, which came from assets stolen from Jews by the SS prior to their execution. SS chief Heinrich Himmler took Husseini under his wing, taking him on tours to Auschwitz, where Husseini urged the guards to greater diligence in running the gas chambers. Himmler financed a Muslim clerical academy in Dresden for Husseini to train graduates who would introduce Nazi rule in Muslim lands. In return, Husseini recruited Bosnian and other Muslim volunteers for the SS, who wore special uniforms with a Nazi-adorned fez as headgear. 20,000 of them formed a special SS unit in Croatia, known as the Handjar, meaning sword, where they fought against partisans in Bosnia. Note, massacring civilians, including 90% of Bosnia's Jews, burning countless Serbian churches. So they were against the Christians as well, so they were Satanists, and villages, and controlling the area. Excuse me, please, I still have a cold. Husseini frequently gave speeches on Berlin radio, in which he exhorted the Nazis in their common cause. Sounds very familiar to what's going on here in Ukraine, doesn't it? With Biden pushing and forcing them to keep at war instead of peace. He exhorted the Nazis in their common cause, and in one he said, "Kill the Jews. Kill them with your hands. Kill them with your teeth. This is well pleasing to Allah." He gave similar speeches to his Arab brethren, such as the one in which he said, "Arise, O sons of Arabia, fight for your sacred rights, slaughter Jews wherever you find them. Their spilled blood pleases Allah, our history and religion. That will save our honour." The condition that the Mufti had set on his support was permission to exterminate the entire Jewish population of Palestine following Hitler's victory. He tried to persuade the Germans to extend the extermination policy to North Africa and Palestine, and even made plans for the construction of a death camp outside Nablus to implement the final solution for the region. In his memoirs, Husseini wrote, "Our fundamental condition for cooperating with Germany was a free hand to eradicate every last Jew from Palestine and the Arab world. I asked Hitler for an explicit undertaking to allow us to solve the Jewish problem in a manner befitting our national and racial aspirations, and according to the scientific methods innovated by Germany in the handling of its Jews. The answer I got was, the Jews are yours." Although he was unsuccessful in his efforts to persuade the Nazis to bomb Tel Aviv and to parachute agents into Palestine to poison Tel Aviv's wells, other efforts of his to increase the number of Jews killed were more successful. He successfully lobbied against a plan Hitler was considering in 1943 that would have allowed Jews to leave Hungary, with the result that 400,000 Hungarian Jews were exterminated. He intervened against a deal Eichmann was about to make with the British government that would have exchanged 5,000 Jewish children for German prisoners of war. His violent protest to Himmler against a Red Cross attempt in late 1942 to trade German prisoners for 10,000 Jewish children sent from Poland to the Theresienstadt camp resulted in the exchange being cancelled and the children's death. How horrible is that? What an inhumane human being. He wasn't a human being, he was a monster. After the war, Husseini was wanted for war crimes, but escaped to asylum in Egypt. Hungary's attempts to extradite him were blocked, and he lived out his life as a hero in the Arab world. Well, I'm going to question that later to find out if there's anything else to be said about him. His passing in 1974 was widely mourned by the masses. I'm going to check that out as well. Today he is venerated as a hero by the PLO. I shall check that out as well. Under his tutelage, several of his younger relatives rose to prominence in the Arab world, including his nephew, Abna al-Rahman Abdul al-Bawf Arafat al-Quad al-Husseini, more commonly known as Yasser Arafat. Well, he was a leader of the PLO, but I need to read some books on this subject myself. In a public speech in 1985, Arafat declared it an honor to follow in his footsteps, and in 2002, Arafat, in an interview, referred to him as our hero. Another protege of Husseini is his grandson, Sheikh Ekrima Sabri, who is currently the Mufti of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Just one day before receiving Pope John Paul II as a guest, he revealed his Nazi sympathies in an interview in which he said, "The figure of 6 million Jews killed during the Holocaust is exaggerated. No, it's not." And he said, "It was a lot less. It is not my fault if Hitler hated the Jews. Anyway, they hate them just about everywhere." A younger cousin of Husseini's, Faisal Husseini, was the PLO's top figure in Jerusalem and was considered a possible successor to Arafat until his death in 2001. I think it's worth all of us doing further research on these claims and read books, and we need as much information as possible, because my personal experience of the Arab people is not as vicious, not with all of them. There are some, of course. Another participant in the 1941, and I'm Jewish, by the way, I never knew until last year. I learnt from an auntie that I am, my mother and my grandmother, but they never brought us up in the Jewish anything or knowing that we were. Probably because of all this war. Another participant in the 1941 pro-Nazi coup in Iraq, which sent Husseini to Berlin, was Khairallah Tulfar. He was jailed for 4 years for his participation, where he wrote a book entitled "Three Whom God Should Not Have Created: Iranians, Jews and Flies." In 1947, his 10-year-old nephew was sent to live with him in his house. The main room was dominated by a large portrait of an idolized Adolf Hitler. This nephew was none other than Saddam Hussein, the former leader of Iraq. Hussein made his uncle the mayor of Baghdad and had his book republished. Excuse me, sorry, I still have this. Republished by the Iraqi Ministry of Education. Then President George Bush identified the similarity between the Iraqi and the Nazi leader. On October the 15th, 1990, he said of Saddam Hussein, "We are dealing with Hitler revisited." Hussein himself, according to a former mistress, would look at himself in the mirror and say, "I am Saddam Hussein, Heil Hitler." Some of his actions, too, had eerie similarities with those of Hitler. There's many people who've mocked and used Hitler, even royalty and all kinds of people, either in jest or sick humour or what have you, so it's not unheard of, but it's horrible. In a purge strongly reminiscent of Hitler's Night of the Long Knives on July the 22nd, 1979, Hussein had about 450 high-ranking military officers, government ministers, revolutionary command members and labour leaders rounded up and killed to ensure his power. And like the Nazis, he used poison gas to exterminate many of his own countrymen. See, you can see that they weren't all like Hitlerites. Perhaps as many as 100,000 Iraqi Kurds. That's a big extermination for a politician, it would be. Well, madman. Among the officers leading the 1952 revolution in Egypt was a member of Young Egypt named Gamal Abdul Nasser, who 2 years later became the leader of the country. His Egypt became home to dozens of high-profile Nazi war criminals. One was SS General Oskar Dirlewanger, who, as a leader of the uniquely vicious Dirlewanger Brigade, helped to crush the Warsaw Ghetto uprising and exterminate the Ukraine's large Jewish population. In Egypt, he became Nasser's personal bodyguard and close friend. Another was Johannes von Leers, Goebbels' right-hand man in his propaganda ministry, who was put in charge of anti-Semitic propaganda for Egypt's Ministry of Information in 1955. Another alumnus of Goebbels' information ministry, Hans Appler, also joined Egypt's Ministry of Information. Among the dozens of others were Franz Bartel, who, after learning about getting information as aid to the Gestapo chief in charge of interrogation at Auschwitz, joined Egypt's Ministry of Information. Hans Becher, who applied what he learned with the Gestapo in Vienna as a police instructor in Alexandria, Egypt, SS Untersführer, Wilhelm Boerner, a guard at the Mauthausen concentration camp, who later trained the Palestine Liberation Front for the Egyptian Ministry of the Interior SS Obergruppenführer Friedrich Bubel, who became the director of Egyptian government's Department of Public Relations. Joachim Daimling, head of the Gestapo in Dusseldorf, who used his Gestapo expertise as advisor to the Egyptian prison system. Dr. Hans Eisele, the doctor at Buchenwald, who experimented on and killed at least 300 patients. I thought it would be a lot more than that. And was reputed to have made lampshades out of human flesh. And who went on to establish a flourishing medical practice in Cairo. SS Hauptsturmführer Heim Heribert, doctor at Mauthausen concentration camp, who became a doctor for the Egyptian police. SS Sturmbannführer Seepel, whose work with the Gestapo in Paris qualified him to provide security for the Ministry of the Interior in Cairo, and on and on and on and on. The infamous Alois Brunner, private secretary to Adolf Eichmann, and responsible for the deportation and death of over 100,000 Jews, initially escaped to Egypt, but moved on to Damascus, where he became a close friend and senior advisor to the Syrian government. As recently as 1989, Syria vehemently refused a French request for his extradition. When Brunner arrived in Damascus, he joined an already established community of escaped Nazi war criminals that included Franz Stangl, the former commandant of the infamous Treblinka extermination camp. Nasser's successor, a president of Egypt, was Anwar Sadat, who is often called a moderate. Yet, shortly after the war, I wish I could read the footnotes to you. There's a lot of high figures there, but it's too small for my eyes. Yet shortly after the war, believing that Hitler was still alive, this moderate wrote Hitler the following letter, and I'm going to quote it. "My dear Hitler, I congratulate you from the bottom of my heart. Even if you appear to have been defeated, in reality you are the victor of evil. You succeeded in creating dissensions between Churchill, the old man, and his allies, the sons of Satan." Well, they're the sons of Satan. "Germany will win because her existence is necessary to preserve the world balance. Germany will be reborn in spite of the Western and Eastern powers. There will be no peace unless Germany once again becomes what she was." As a government minister in 1953, Sadat wrote, I was 7 then, Sadat wrote, "Hitler was wronged and slandered, for he did no more to the Jews than the European people who slaughtered the Jews before him. He was trying to save the world from this malignant evil. Why do people hate Jews? This is terrible. Sadat's close confidant, Anis Mansour, editor of the Egyptian paper October, wrote, "The world is now aware of the fact that Hitler was right and that the cremation ovens were the appropriate means of punishing the Jews." What, for being Jews? Human beings created in God's image and likeness? The popularity of Nazism in the Arab world has never ceased. In 1999, Hitler's Mein Kampf ranked 6th on the bestseller list among Palestinian Arabs. Louis Al-Hajj, translator of the Arabic edition, writes glowingly in the preface about Hitler, and it's here. Adolf Hitler is one of the few great men, a man of ideology, who bequeathed an ideological heritage whose decay is inconceivable. His National Socialism did not die with the death of its herald. Rather, its seeds multiplied under each star. Hitler's opinions and theories on nationalism, regimes, and ethnicity are not yet outmoded. Can you imagine that he said that? The Holocaust is routinely denied by governments throughout the Arab world. Consider the following quotes from the official Egyptian government press. Egypt is considered one of the more moderate Arab states. Even if the ovens at Buchenwald and Auschwitz were working day and night, it would have taken dozens of years to kill 6 million people, and not just the 3 years which the Nazis had Al-Akbar, July 14th, 1998. They like to twist the facts. Even if Israelis have built their state upon a collection of myths with no truthful basis, i.e., the myth of the extermination of the Jews in ovens by the Nazis in World War II, Al-Akbar, July 24th, 1998. The Jews invented the myth of mass extermination and the fabrication that 6 million Jews were put to death in Nazi ovens. They have the proof. The Holocaust is an Israeli myth. Al-Akbar, September the 25th, 1998. They wish, but it is fact. The American Secretary of State stood in front of the memorial of the false Holocaust of the Jews in World War II, Al-Akbar, March 7th, 2001. So it seems like they're perpetuating it. So, continuing, there are no findings to indicate the existence of mass graves. That's not true, because the size of the ovens makes it impossible for many Jews to have been killed there. According to the lists presented by the Soviets to the Germans, no more than 70,000 Jews were registered at having been at Auschwitz Al-Ahram, February the 2nd, 1998. Sometimes the Holocaust denial is coupled with a pronounced sympathy for Hitler, as in this article from the Egyptian government daily Al-Akhbar on May 27th, 2001, condensed. Hitler's executioners took his rights away from him and attributed to him crimes that he did not commit. All of Hitler's crimes and infractions were forgotten by the world, except for one crime that was exaggerated and blown completely out of proportion, thanks to the insistence of the world Zionism to continue to stoke the fire. The false Holocaust, whose numbers and scope they have exaggerated until it has reached the level of the merciless destruction of 6 million Jews. It's all very well all these years later, denying all this. It seems so wrong. But the devil is a liar, and so are his followers. The first dubious fact is the number of 6 million Jews who were burnt in the gas chamber. Even if we cross off 1 0 from the 6 million and are left with 1/10 of this number, it would still seem exaggerated and would have to be investigated. Did Hitler attack the Jews, or did their crime deserve even more? The Zionists were a fifth column in Germany, and they betrayed the country that hosted them. This had to be exposed. Hitler discovered that the Zionists were spies for the Allied powers. Inevitably, he was enraged and took revenge on them for this great betrayal. Germany should not be paying compensations for fake crimes that have no proof except for false and misleading claims. According to the Arab media, it was the Jews themselves who planned the Holocaust. Can you believe the nonsense that they spin? Always remember who the Jews are and their corruption in the world. They are cursed, according to these, but by God they're blessed. What has come to be called the Holocaust, that is the slaughter of the Jews by Nazism, was planned by the Jews' leader and was part of their policy. They're cursed with the curse of Allah in this world and in the hereafter. The sermon was by religious leader Sheikh Ibrahim Mahdi, broadcast on Palestinian Authority PA television on September the 21st, 2001, and has history now in the prime of its potency, clarified that the victim of the Holocaust were themselves those who created it. Why would they commit suicide and murder of one another? The Jews actively participated in directing European feelings against them. Official Palestinian Authority daily Al-Hayat Al-Jadida, April 13th, 2001. As for Hitler, there's nothing but congratulations. Thanks to Hitler of blessed memory, who on behalf of the Palestinians revenged in advance against the most vile criminals on the face of the earth. Although we do have a complaint against him for his revenge on them was not enough. Egyptian government daily Al-Akhbar, April 18th, 2001. There's something by an author called Ahmed Ragab, May 31st, 2001. I can't read any of that, it's too small. It's notes. People all over the world have come to realise that Hitler was right, since Jews are bloodsuckers, interested in destroying the whole world, which has expelled them and despised them for centuries, and burnt them in Hitler's crematoria. 1 million, 6 million, would that he'd finished it. Egyptian Government Daily, Al Akbar, August 19th, 1973. It's the year my dad died, December 19th, not August 19th. There is also the hope that what he began, others might complete. One of the reasons for the recognition of the State of Israel was the desire of the people in the East and West to get rid of as many as possible of the representatives of that human error known as the Jews, to concentrate them in one place so that it would be easier to strike them at the right moment. Wickedness this. We cannot help but see before us the figure of that great man Hitler, may Allah have mercy on him, who was the wisest of those who confronted this problem, and who out of compassion for humanity tried to exterminate every Jew. Dr. Yahya al-Rakor in Al-Ahrar, the organ of Egypt's Liberal Party, July the 19th, 1982, condensed. So they never gave up. Curiously, the Arab identification with the Nazis is so strong that at times Arab leaders accuse the Allies' attack on Germany as being in reality an attack on Islam, as in the following sermon, which was preached at the mosque on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem on November the 2nd, 2001. Excuse me, I must see where my drink is. It's a long way away, but I have to have a drink. Sorry. Sorry. When you go out, you come back with a cough. Curiously, the Arab identification with the Nazis is so strong that at times Arab leaders accuse the Allies' attack on Germany as being in reality an attack on Islam, as in the following sermon, which was preached at the mosque on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem on November the 2nd, 2001, and broadcast on the Voice of Palestine radio. It is worth remembering that the mosque's mufti is Husseini's grandson. The attack on our Islamic allies seems to be a repetition of the First World War, reminding us of the cooperation between the heretics to bring down the German nation, which was destroyed by the heretic nations, thus giving those heretic and imperialistic nations the freedom to invade our Arab Muslim homelands. These heretic nations are once again attacking like dogs Muslim Afghanistan and are fighting Islam everywhere. When the English and the French fought the Nazis, were they then also fighting terror? or were they fighting Islam? We urge all Muslims to unite in a war against the Crusaders, and that Allah will bring vengeance upon them. The next title, Official Arab Anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitic slanders that permeate much of the press in the Arab world are often indistinguishable from those of the Third Reich. Persistent themes that had been previously used by the Nazis include the intrinsic inferiority of the Jews as a race, the degenerate nature of the Jews as a source of moral corruption, and sexual degeneracy, the blood libel, that the blood of non-Jewish children is a necessary ingredient in Passover matzos, and that there is a worldwide Jewish conspiracy to take over the world, that the wars of the world are started by Jews for profit, and that the Jews are behind any and all acts of mass violence, including the 2001 World Trade Center attack. These slanders have not abated, despite the fact that a key provision of the Camp David Accords was that the parties shall seek to foster mutual understanding and tolerance, and will accordingly abstain from hostile propaganda against each other. Article 5.3 of Annex 111.3, that is, some typical recent examples follow, most from the government-sponsored Arab press in the moderate Arab countries. Certainly this cursed yarmulke, the skull cap, required by Jewish religious law, causes whoever wears it to lose his righteousness, to forget justice, and to free himself of any wisdom or logic. March the 7th, 2001. Egyptian government-sponsored daily Al-Akbar, written by Editor-in-Chief. Has there been any change at all in the personality of the fanatic Jew, as it has come to be known and described in the literature and heritage of most of the nations of the world? Is there any difference between Netanyahu's traits and those of the moneylender from the play, The Merchant of Venice? Egyptian Daily, Al-Ahram, December 8th, 1998. Anyone who studies the Jewish heritage cannot help but feel that all conspiracies against religions and generally all destructive upheavals and the undermining of values and basic principles, all are the result of this heritage. Jewish guidance directs every act of destruction. Satan worship is a part of Judaism. I refute that. As is the goal of destroying the monotheistic religions. Egyptian Weekly, October the 4th, 1998. There is a great Jewish plot, this is what they're writing in their papers, to gain control of the world. Egyptian Daily, Ahram, May 13th, 1998. Allah commands the Muslims to fight the friends of Satan, wherever they may be found, and among Satan's friends. Indeed, his best friends in our age are the Jews. Sheikh Abdul al-Halim Mahmud, rector of Al-Azhar University, Cairo, Egypt. And then it goes on to say, Jews are liars, corrupt, jealous, crafty, treacherous, stupid, despicable, coward, and low life. They violate agreements and contracts and cause all evil in the world. The Jews are a mortal danger, threatening the world, a lethal plague that dismantles and destroys it. They are a hateful Satan. The Jewish message is hatred and jealousy, lies and deception, vilification, duplicity, and ruinous Syrian author Dr. Salah Khalidi, that's I-D-I. The Jews have been behind all of the wars, and their goal was corruption and destruction. This is their means of getting rich quick after wars. Egyptian Daily, Al-Ahram, November 14th, 1998. Israel was behind the attack at Luxor, a terrorist attack on tourists in Egypt, in order to sow division in the Egyptian nation. Egyptian Daily, Al-Akbar, June 16th, 1998. The Israelis have repeatedly proved their disregard and disrespect of the heavenly religions. They have desecrated the Al-Aqsa mosque and killed worshippers inside the court, and they dug out Christian cemeteries and spread the bodies of the dead in an abhorrent manner on the surface of the soil. This indicates their racist ideology and practices. Official Syrian paper, Tishrin, May 2001. It gets worse by the page. Riyadh Aznoun, who holds the PA's, Palestinian Authorities, health portfolio, told reporters that both the US and Israel were using the area as a testing ground for new weaponry, including non-specified poisonous gases and missiles laced with diluted uranium. Reuters news agency's March 23rd, 2001. I heard that too. I have heard those reports, and there has been something odd going on in that regard. A reliable source at the Arab League provided details of the report circulated by the League to its member states, warning of imported blood units contaminated with the AIDS virus, hepatitis, and bilharzias. Israel treated the blood units before they were sent to Arab and Third World nations. The question is Israel waging chemical and biological warfare against the Arab states and Islam? That certainly does need investigation. That type of thing I've heard of already. Egyptian Weekly, Roz Al-Yusuf, August 24th, 1998. The article was titled Senior Arab League Official Tells US the Story of Israeli Blood Tainted with AIDS. I've heard about that too. That also needs investigation, because there's wrong on both sides here. It's terrible. Our brother, the Colonel Muammar al-Qaddafi, the leader of the Libyan revolution, revealed that 2 years ago, Libyan children in the city of Benghazi suffered from the most abominable crime in the history of mankind, when foreign nurses injected them with the AIDS virus. Well, how evil is that? While pretending to immunize them. Quadhafi added, there are those who think that the CIA or the Israeli Mossad were behind this crime. Well, that is evil if that is true. Quadhafi added that this act reveals the ugly face of those who introduced the AIDS virus to Africa to exhaust its strength and deplete its resources with the intention of gaining control over Africa. Egyptian government daily, Al-Ahram, week of April 25th, 2001. Israeli planes and helicopters have dropped poisoned sweets in the West Bank in order to kill children who would pick and eat them. Official Iranian news agency IRNA, May 2001. I've also heard that too. Some of the calumnies against the Israelis are so outrageous that they would be humorous if they were not intended in all seriousness to incite murderous hatred. A front-page story in the Palestinian Authority PA newspaper, Al-Hayat Al-Jadida, in early August 2001, reported that the Israeli army is using armed female strippers in their war against Arab youth. Well, that does really sound very stupid and highly unlikely. That is absolute. Well, that does go too far, I think. When rock-throwing incidents begin, the male Israeli soldiers run for cover, while a female soldier begins to perform a striptease on top of a barricade, distracting the youth, until she pulls a pistol out of her underwear and begins shooting. Well, I'll have to investigate that because I've never heard any of this. One cannot help wondering if the intention of the report is to encourage teenage boys to take part in rock throwing. The Israeli government was also accused of sending radio-controlled rabid dogs into the occupied territory to bite Arab children. The United States is not exempt from being targeted by such delusional accusations inspired to stir up hatred. The editor of the mainstream Egyptian newspaper Al-Ahram reported in early November 2001 that in Afghanistan, the United States is intentionally making its airdrops of food in areas full of landmines in order to cause the death of Afghans, and that the food is genetically altered to kill them. In the aftermath of the World Trade Center attack, New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani was falsely quoted in the Saudi newspaper Al Riyadh as saying, "What we must do is kill 6,000 innocent Arab people." Cool. Where did all this information come from? Because both sides are putting out propaganda, I suppose. And how do you sift the truth? That's a big job. It's food for thought, all this. I can see wrong on both sides here. The editorial went on to state authoritatively that he is a homosexual and a Jew. The Palestinian Authority's newspaper Al Hayat Al Jadida equally accurately reported that Gulani hides his first name so as not to remind the Jewish voters of the infamous Rudolf Hitler. This is why he prefers to shorten it to Rudy. This blatant disregard for truth in the interests of stirring up hatred against the United States as well as Israel is exhibited daily in the Palestinian Authority press. For instance, after Chekinan rebels took about 700 theatre-goers hostage in a Moscow theatre, and many died in the ensuing operation by the Russian police, the same official Palestinian Authority newspaper reported that the CIA had masterminded the terrorist action in retaliation against Russia for its opposition in the UN to the United States policy toward Iraq, and suggested that France would be the next to suffer from such surreptitious attacks by the CIA, because they too opposed the United States policy. Well, all of this is very complicated because there's wrong on both sides, on all of the sides, whether it's the Arab side, the Israeli side, the Jewish side, all of these political people and the non-political. It is very, very confusing. And there's lies on all sides, as far as I'm understanding this as I read it, because they're all twisting the truth, every side. There isn't one side that's right in all of this, but I'm going to continue to read. But it is very disturbing. Shortly after the September the 11th, 2001 attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, Egyptian Sheikh Mohammed Al-Gemayah, Imam of the Islamic Cultural Center and Mosque of New York City, told an Egyptian interviewer, backed by the full authority of his position, that the Jews had planned the terrorist attack themselves and now were secretly killing Muslim children in New York City. Well, I understood and knew some part of that, but not about the killing of the Muslim children in New York City hospitals. That part I didn't know, but the other part I did know, and I've read and seen information on all of those claims, but certainly not the killing of the Muslim children. But nothing would surprise me because it's all tit for tat. Jewish doctors in one of the hospitals, and I'll put allegedly here because I don't know, poisoned sick Muslim children who then died. The Jewish element is as Allah described it when he said, "They disseminate corruption in the land." You see, these people, the Jews, all the time, everywhere, disseminating corruption, heresy, homosexuality, alcoholism and drugs. Because of them, but they've been here all along. You can't blame one race of people because the whole world is full of all this satanic stuff. There are strip clubs, homosexuals and lesbians everywhere, and it's worse now. Before this, they rode on the back of England and on the back of the French Empire. Yeah, they've always existed. After that, they rode on the back of Germany but Hitler annihilated them because they betrayed him and violated their contract with him. Only the Jews are capable of planning such an incident, the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, because it was planned with great precision, of which Osama bin Laden or any other Islamic organization or intelligence apparatus is incapable. This incident urges people to come to know Islam, now that it has been proven to the Americans that they were deceived by the Jews. Well, I would call them Zionists as opposed to Jews. There's a big difference, because the Zionists don't believe in God. They're Satanists. Allah has foiled the Jews, who set a trap to try to destroy the image of the Muslims. There's no way the Jewish people did that. The unbelievers, the ungodly, yes, but not those who believe in God, no. During the Middle Ages, the primary blood libel used to stir up hatred and violence against the Jews was the accusation that they killed Christians for their blood. Not true. Which was allegedly needed to make Passover matzos. No way. No way. Although this vicious calumny has largely faded from Europe, it is alive and well in the government-sponsored Arab press. Maybe. I don't know. On the eve of the Arab summit in Amman in early 2001, but we're now in 2023, so a lot has passed since these days, the Egyptian government daily printed an article exposing the practice. You need proof of these things. The Talmud, the second holiest book for the Jews, determines that the matzahs of the Atonement Day must be kneaded with blood from a non-Jew. The preference is for the blood of youths after raping them. Well, this is getting more evil and sick than earlier. Rabbi Moshe Abu al-Afia revealed this during the investigation of the disappearance of Father Toma in the Jewish quarter of Damascus in 1840. I published some of the investigation documents, which are kept in the files of Syria's Justice Ministry, in an article that Al-Akbar was kind enough to publish on October the 20th, 2000, on the eve of the emergency summit summoned by Egypt at the time. I hope you've not lost the plot yet, but it's not smooth flowing, this. I called on the summit to take action so that the day will not come when big bottles will be filled with Arab blood. Father Toma entered the Jewish quarter to attend to a sick man and ended up slaughtered without a drop of blood in him. This is so satanic, it makes you feel sick. A group of Jews, I'll have to put allegedly here, kidnapped him and his servant. They slaughtered him. I have to put the word alleged because I'm not too sure where the proof will be for it to say it's a definitive. Slaughtered him and collected his blood in a big bottle, which was then left in the house's cellar to use in the dough of the matzahs for the celebration of the Atonement Day. I ask myself, was the purpose of the Al-Aqsa massacres political, or was it for religious purpose, aimed at letting pure Arab blood for the Jewish holidays? Dr. Mahmoud al-Sayed al-Kurdi in Al-Akbar, April 2001. This is so horrendous. It is satanic. There is no other way to describe it. It is satanic. And I'm sure they have Satanists there, side by side by side. There's, let's put it as we have to see it. There's good Jews, good Christians, and good Muslims. And then you've got the evil. So you have to have a discerning spirit. You can't take all this as gospel. No way, you can't. There's too much horror here. This was just part of a long-running pattern. In 1962, the Egyptian Ministry of Education published a book entitled Human Sacrifices in the Talmud as one of a series of official national books put out by the Egyptian Institute for Publications, because they've got no barriers, have they? The introduction to this reprint of an 1890 work states that it provides conclusive evidence that this people permits bloodshed and makes it a religious obligation laid down by the Talmud. Well, I'm sure there's theologians out there and philosophers who'll question all that. The Syrian Minister of Defense, Mustafa Tulas, authored a book on the Damascus blood libel involving Father Toma, entitled The Matzos of Zion. Well, as I said before, I believe Zionists are not real practicing Jews, but they're Satanists. With a typical concern for accuracy, the back jacket explains, the book sets forth in minute detail and with scientific exactitude the Jews' blood ritual, in which they slaughter Christians and Muslims so they can mix their blood into matzos for Yom Kippur. Recently, Purim too has been added to the list of Jewish holidays for which Christian or Muslim blood is required. It sounds so far-fetched. The following ran a few days before Purim in a government-sponsored daily newspaper in the moderate Arab state Saudi Arabia, not in the Middle Ages, but in 2002. Special ingredient for Jewish holidays is human blood from non-Jewish youth. This is so far-fetched. It is absolutely. I knew this was going to be a difficult chapter, and I prayed before reading it, but it isn't pleasant, nice, accurate, or it's not fiction, but it's somebody's reality that these things are being produced and published and written and shared and spoken about, and horrific, not godly at all, totally the reverse, totally satanic. I chose to speak about the Jewish holiday of Purim because it is connected to the month of March, which is coming up now. This holiday has some dangerous customs that will no doubt horrify you. Well, I'm totally horrified, and I'm on page 279. This holiday has some dangerous customs that will no doubt horrify you, and I, the reader, am already horrified. And I apologise to any listener or reader who is harmed because of this. Well, thank you, author. Roy H. SCHOEMAN, I am horrified, and I actually feel sick at this point. I will continue reading to the end if possible, without hoping that the computer doesn't cut out, because I'm still a long way from the end, and it is horrible. I should maybe consider stopping here because it is horrible, but I might read to the bottom of the page and see what is over on the next page, which will be 280, because I find it's turning my stomach now. I've read too much nastiness, so I will do a part 1 and part 2. This will be part 1. It's too awful. So we accept your apology, writer, because I cannot in my mind sort out fact from fiction, and I do not take anyone's word, even yours, as gospel. I will do my own research on all of this. I will read it as you've written it, but it's horrible, 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 horrible. During this holiday, the Jew, and I'm Jewish and didn't know it, must prepare very special pastries, the filling of which is not only costly and rare, it cannot be found at all on the local and international markets. Unfortunately, this filling cannot be left out or substituted with any alternative serving the same purpose. For this holiday, the Jewish people, and I actually find this hard to believe, must obtain human blood so that their clerics can prepare the holiday pastries. I'm already feeling like puking. In other words, the practice cannot be carried out as required if human blood is not spilled. And the writer says, before I go into the details, I would like to clarify that the Jews spilling human blood to prepare pastry for their holidays is, and I never knew this till this moment, a well-established fact, historically and legally, all throughout history. This was one of the main reasons for the persecution and exile that were their lot in Europe and Asia at various times. And there's a footnote, Israel National News Archives, www.israelnationalnews.com. I don't know what that's for. So I'll read on till a little bit more on page 280 I am. For this holiday, the victim must be a mature adolescent who is, of course, a non-Jew. That is, a Christian or a Muslim. His blood is taken and dried into granules. The cleric blends these granules into the pastry dough. They can also be saved for the next holiday. In contrast, for the Passover slaughtering, about which I, the writer, Roy H. SCHOEMAN, about which I intend to write one of these days, the blood of Christian and Muslim children under the age of 10 must be used, and the cleric can mix the blood into the dough before or after dehydration. The actions of the Jewish vampires cause them pleasure. Let us now examine how the victim's blood is spilled. For this, a needle-studded barrel is used. This is a kind of barrel about the size of the human body, with extremely sharp needles set in it on all sides. These needles pierce the victim's body from the moment notice it's a he all the time, he is placed in the barrel. These needles do the job, and the victim's blood drips from him very slowly. Thus the victim suffers dreadful torment that affords the Jewish vampires great delight, as they carefully monitor every detail of the bloodshedding with pleasure and love that are difficult to comprehend. After this barbaric display, the Jews take the spilled blood in the bottle set in the bottom of the needle-studded barrel, and the Jewish cleric makes his co-religionists completely happy on their holiday when he serves them the pastries in which human blood is mixed. Dr. Umaymah Ahmad al-Jalahama of King Faisal University in the Saudi Government Daily, Al-Ridiyah, March the 10th, 2002. Recently, the Arab Radio and Television Network produced a 41-part television series based on the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, to be broadcast in about 30 Arab countries. According to a report on the series in Egyptian weekly Ros al-Yusuf, for the first time, the series writer courageously tackles the 24 protocols of the Elders of Zion, revealing them and clarifying that they are the central line that still to this very day dominates Israel's policy, political aspirations, and racism. Yet, the protocols were already proven to be a fake as early as 1921, when the London Times printed identical excerpts from it and an earlier work, which had nothing to do with Jews or Judaism side by side. That earlier work was an obscure satire of Napoleon III by the Frenchman Maurice Joly, entitled Dialogue in Hell, between Machiavelli and Montesquieu, the author of Protocols, an agent of the Russian secret police named Pyotr Ivanovich Rakovotsky, simply copied much of the text, changing the villains from French royalists to Jews, substituting the Zion for France, and presented it as a true account of a meeting held by Jewish leaders in 1897, in which they developed a plot to take over the world. the revision of Jewish history, we have seen how the current Arab press has revised the history of the Holocaust. Similar historical revision is employed to denigrate further the Jews, and especially to portray them as alien interlopers in the land of Israel, in order to manipulate public opinion both within the Arab world and in the world at large. Arab governments deny the history of the Jewish people in Israel. Israel of the Bible dwelled near Yemen. All these events of Israel in the Bible did not happen in Palestine. Palestine history and tradition show on PA, Palestinian Authority, television, May the 26th, 1998, Jerusalem is a Palestinian Arab city, and it has no connection to Israel. Palestinian Authority official Abd al-Rahman on PA television, May the 24th, 1998. The western wall of Al-Haram, Al-Sharif, is the Burak wall, not the Wailing, as the Jews allege, to justify establishment of their state in Palestine. The current Muslim mosque on the site was built 2,000 years before Prophet Solomon and remained so until this day. ArabicNews.com news service, March the 7th, 2001, citing study published by Ain Shams University, Egypt. It is of particular importance to deny the Jewish connection to Jerusalem. Thus, in an interview on Palestinian television on June 28, 1998, Yasser Arafat stated, "The issue of Jerusalem is a Palestinian, an Islamic and Christian issue, not a Jewish issue at all, since they, the Jews, consider Hebron to be holier than Jerusalem." He also denied that there had ever been a Jewish temple on the site. Until now, all the excavations that have been carried out have failed to prove the location of the temple. They have not succeeded in giving even one proof as the location of the temple, and he denied that the Wailing Wall had any historical connection to Jews or Jewish worship. This is, however, contradicted not only by history and archaeology, but also by documents written by the Muslim authorities themselves before the current campaign began. For example, in 1930, an English-language tourist guide to the Temple Mount titled "A Brief Guide to Al-Haram Al-Sharif" was produced by the Supreme Muslim Council, the governing Muslim body in Jerusalem at the time. It reads in part, The site is one of the oldest in the world. Its sanctity dates from the earliest times. Its identity with the site of Solomon's temple is beyond dispute. This too is the spot, according to universal belief, on which David built there an altar unto the Lord, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. Yet, in 2001, the Palestinian Authority, Mufti Ikrima Sabri, flatly asserted there is not even the smallest indication of the existence of a Jewish temple on this place in the past. In the whole city, there is not even a single stone indicating Jewish history. In reality, it is the Muslim connection to Jerusalem that is in doubt. Islam's claim to Jerusalem depend on the Temple Mount being the site from which Muhammad ascended to heaven in a dream, thus making Jerusalem the third holiest site of Islam. This ascent occurs in the 17th surah in the Quran, in a passage entitled, and I've read the Quran many years ago, beginning in 1964. The passage recounts that in a dream or vision, Muhammad was taken by night from the sacred mosque to the farthest mosque, whose precinct we have blessed, that we might show him our signs. The farthest mosque is now considered by the Arab world to be the Mosque of Omar on the Temple Mount. Yet, when Muhammad died in AD 632, Jerusalem was still a Christian city and had no mosques at all. In fact, up until AD 638, when Jerusalem was captured by Caliph Omar, a Christian church known as St. Mary of Justinian stood on the site. It was converted into a mosque only around AD 711 by Abna el-Wahid, who ruled Jerusalem from 705 to 715. Thus, not only is it certain that Muhammad was never physically present in Jerusalem, but the mosque on the Temple Mount to which he supposedly went during the night journey was not built until 3 generations after his death. The Arab world paid little attention to Jerusalem or to the Temple Mount whenever they had uncontested possession of it during the several centuries that the Temple Mount was held by the Muslim Turks. No repairs were done on the Dome of the Rock, and Al-Aqsa Mosque, as can be seen in photographs taken of them at the time, which show them in a state of disrepair and apparent abandonment, with missing roof tiles and high grass growing through the paving stones. Neither did they receive much attention during the period that the mount was held by Jordan from 1948 to 1967. In contrast to its tenuous connection to Islam, Jerusalem is central to both Judaism and Christianity. The Temple Mount is the site of the only true temple in Judaism where the Holy of Holies was, and where sacrifice was to be offered, as well as the spot on which Abraham tried to sacrifice Isaac, inaugurating Judaism itself. Jerusalem is absolutely central to Judaism. It is mentioned 871 times in the Old Testament and is one of the most frequent themes in Jewish prayer. It is not mentioned a single time in the Quran. I'm going to stop there because the next little title is Peace with Israel. I'll just give you a snippet of the first paragraph, but I'm going to stop at Peace with Israel. In the Arab press, it is all too clear that the purpose of the war of the Islamic states against Israel is not to change the policies or the boundaries of Israel, but to rid the world of it altogether. Arab countries have tried every single nationalistic way in attempts to annihilate Israel. Now the time has come to try Islam as an alternative. I advise the Palestinian leaders to stop trying to negotiate and instead fight Israel to death by relying upon God, most great, the Palestinian people and their arms, as these negotiations cause the struggling nations to lose faith. And those are the words of Ayatollah Khomeini of Persia, Iran. As a member of the Palestinian Authority's Legislative Council said recently on PA television, our struggle is still necessary. We are still at the beginning of the road. Our war with Israel and the Jews has not ended and will not end until the establishment of a Palestinian state on the entire land of Palestine. So we'll end that where I said peace with Israel. That is now 1 hour 52 minutes, and I'll just put the book down there. Thank you so much for listening. I didn't read any sacred scripture, so I'm just going to thank you so much for listening. It's been a very difficult reading. I didn't like much of the content that I read. I would certainly do some research because some of it was so horrible and unbelievable, and if it is fact, and it's ghastly, but it doesn't surprise me because the enemy is Satan. And Satan attaches himself to all faiths, all religions, Jewish, Christian and Muslim. So he's the enemy of mankind because God loves mankind. Satan hates God, and so hating makes him want us to join him in hell. Hell was created for Satan, not for us. So we have to do our darndest to seek peace with one another and love one another. That's all I'm going to say. I'm very tired. That has done my head in. It was the most difficult chapter in the whole book. Ironically, chapter 7, and I haven't finished. So I'll have to do some more of that. Hopefully it'll just be a part 2, not a part 3. God bless you all. And thank you so much for sharing and your comments. You do encourage me, but some of the stuff I read is really, really... God bless. Good night.